It's a wonderful day in the neighborhood. Wonderful day in the neighborhood. Will you be mine? Will you be mine? Oh, there we go. Welcome, neighbors. All right, everybody's teasing me about my cardigan, calling me Mr. Rogers, so I thought I'd go with it for the day. Anyway, if you're tuning in later than 1 o'clock because we are experiencing, many areas of the country are experiencing a Facebook being down all over the country. So I don't know whether or not it will cut in at any point during this, but we're going to record a few things for you so that we can load it up later onto 5-Star Connect. A couple of announcements. First of all, please update your billing email information. Sumo with the and Jeff Bender has sent out instructions. It's really important that you do that, and I've made the commitment that I'm actually going to do it too sometime today. Don't forget to sign up for the 5-Star Christmas Party. The invitation with the RSVP is going to be coming out soon, and it's fun. It's a great show. It's a great party, great food, great atmosphere, and a couple of friendly people there, like about 500. So it's going to be at the Grand Rapids Art Museum, and we'd love to see you there. For me, it's a great opportunity to put a face with a voice. I get to talk to so many of you, but I don't necessarily connect a face with a voice, and that's great. I'd love to meet you all, as would many other agents. It's fun to connect. Con Ed, big announcement for Con Ed is going to be January 30th, 8 to 5 p.m. at the Pinnacle Center in Hudsonville. So again, that's a little mark your calendar thing. Oh, I mentioned right here again, if you haven't signed up for the Christmas party, do it. Okay. Let's talk about possession issues. I get this question a lot, and the transition from the seller to the buyer at possession time can sometimes get a little ugly. And so let's talk about that. For example, let's say that the seller is going to retain possession for 30 days after closing. If the furnace dies within that 30-day period of time that the seller is possessing the property after the closing, who's responsible to fix it? Now, again, I'm going to always caution that you refer to your individual purchase agreements. But in most of the purchase agreements that we have, that we're working with, again, we're working with 10 different boards, so it's important that you refer to the individual purchase agreements that you're working with. I have copies of most of them, so if you call me with a particular question, I'm going to be able to refer to the individual purchase agreement that you're using. In most situations, though, once the seller and buyer close on the property, that property belongs to the buyer and the seller is a tenant. So even though it seems a little weird, if at day 15 that furnace dies, it's the buyer's responsibility to replace it, not the seller's. And that's kind of an upside down thought process for a lot of agents who think that the seller has to give possession in the same condition that it was purchased. That's not exactly true when possession for a period of time after the closing is included in the purchase agreement. What happens when the seller just decides that they're not going to move out at closing, if it's possession at closing, or at that period of time that they've agreed to 30 days possession after closing, for example. What if they just say, well, we're not going to move out. We've decided that we got some more stuff we got to pack up, and so it's going to be a couple of weeks more. Well, obviously that's a breach of contract from what they signed. And when I say words like breach of contract, you can insert the word attorney immediately after that, because we have no power to enforce the contract. We can't go out there and pick up their stuff and put it in the streets, can we? But what we can do is we can include in the paragraph regarding tenancy and sufferance, or in an addendum regarding tenancy and sufferance, that if the seller continues to live in the property past the agreed upon possession date, the seller is going to be charged, let's say, $500 a day for every day that they live in the property. Now, obviously, the challenge there is to collect that money. If they live in their 10 days after the agreed upon possession date, that's $5,000. How do you go about getting it? Well, the buyer's probably going to have to go after them in small claims court. Or you can set aside, in the course of in the words of the purchase agreement, you can set aside an escrow as a security deposit to protect the condition of the property, but also to protect the possession that you've all agreed to. Now, in the past couple of years, I think you've seen me say that's going to hurt the marketability of your offer. If you're the buyer's agent and you've written that kind of language, I can assure you that there's going to be competing offers that will not have that. And so all of a sudden now you're competing with an offer that doesn't have that kind of language, and the seller is going to be more apt to accept the other offer, the competing offer, than your offer. Now, however, we're seeing a little bit of a balance more in the market than there was even 2 to 3 months ago. Now you may find that homes are sitting on the market longer than they were. We don't know what the first of the year is going to bring. We don't know what spring is going to bring at this point, other than warm weather, which is always a good idea. I'm not a fan of winter, sorry. But anyway, so right now you might have a better chance at getting some sort of a security deposit in place as of the closing, which guarantees that if the sellers fail to live up to the terms of their contract, which is to leave the house in reasonably good, clean condition and to get out on time, then you've got some teeth that you can say, we're not going to release your security deposit, or we're going to attempt to attach your security deposit. What I find a lot of, though, is that there's confusion, just plain confusion, between the two parties about when the possession is going to be a transition, when that transition is going to take. And some of it has to do with a misunderstanding about what the effective date of the contract is. Some agents wrongly perceive that the effective date is the date that the contract is signed. That's not the effective date of the contract. That is the effective date of the contract. It's not when the clock starts ticking as it regards issues like inspections or ordering title work, ordering well and septic inspections, and the first day of possession. Possession is not calculated based on a given hour, unless it is stipulated that possession is to be transferred to the new owner at 12 noon on December 5th, for example. And that's what I would encourage you to do. If at some point you come together on a purchase agreement, at some point prior to the closing, I would encourage you to talk with the other agent and say, how about we do this? how about we establish when those keys are going to get turned over before we ever end up at the closing table? For example, they're going to be transferred on December 5th at 12 noon. Let's agree on a specific time so that there's no confusion by anyone about when that transfer is going to take place. What happens if your buyer drives up thinking that they're going to get a possession on Tuesday, and the seller's going, I don't know what you're talking about. We're not planning to move until tomorrow. Our moving trucks are showing up tomorrow. So nice try, but, adios. Well, then your buyer has the option, unfortunately, of renting those trucks or keeping it in storage overnight in order to take possession the next day. What happens if your buyer shows up, they get possession at whatever time, but there's an absolute mess in the house? I mean, we're talking like hoarder type mess, stuff that you take dumpsters out. Well, obviously, the seller hasn't lived up to their agreement in the purchase agreement that they would leave the house in broom clean condition. A broom clean condition is really a subjective phrase, but I can assure you that no judge is going to equate shoulder deep newspapers with broom clean condition. If they have paint cans laying all over and stuff in the yard, a couple of washing machines or something, a judge is not going to perceive that as broom clean condition. I mentioned judge, which means that the buyer is going to have to take the seller to court to resolve the difference between broom clean condition and leaving a bunch of stuff and debris on the property. The only other way around it is for the agents to come to some agreement, try to get the buyers and sellers to agree to some kind of compensation, some kind of accommodation that will make the buyer satisfied and get the property in some reasonable competition. For those of you, are we on Facebook now? We're not on Facebook, but I understand it's up. So, is it possible that a security deposit can be put in escrow? As I said, now it's probably more possible than ever, than it has been the last few years anyway. And I would encourage, if your buyer is concerned about getting possession on time and getting the property in reasonably clean condition, then you probably should put it in there to protect your buyer. Otherwise, you're leaving the buyer completely open to whatever that seller may decide. We talked about tenancy and sufferance, and what is a good per diem to put in the PA. Well, I usually put about $500 per day because I want the seller to take it very seriously that if they don't get out on time, it's going to get painful real fast. Now, does that discourage a seller from accepting your offer? Yeah, it could. And you have to take that into consideration when you're writing the offer. Is that going to put your purchase agreement in less favor with the seller than a competing offer? Ultimately, you have to have the conversation with your buyer and say, here's what we can do, here's what the outcome might be, here's the pros that we could actually get the property in good condition if we do this and on time. And the con is that your offer may not get accepted. So ultimately, it's up to the buyer as to what decision and what direction they want to take. So, question came up recently regarding title work. Do you know what a Schedule B is and how to read it? If you don't know what a Schedule B is in your title work and how to read it and interpret it, I encourage you to get with Star Title. And I know they've been doing some classes lately, but it's really, really important that you are able to communicate to your clients, whether they're buyers or sellers, what is in a Schedule B and what therefore is required by them to have to have whatever matters resolved in order to close a deal. And finally, what happens when a seller counters and offers? See if we're getting any questions. Just no questions. Okay. What happens when a seller counters and offers it with this language? This offer is accepted by the seller subject to the seller finding suitable housing. That has happened more than once. This offer is subject to the seller finding suitable housing. The seller's acceptance is subject to the seller finding suitable housing. Wow. That really leaves the door open for the seller. There's no date, there's no contingency plan for the buyer in that language, and so ultimately it could happen with that kind of language that the seller could kill the deal the day before the closing, saying, oh, well, you know what, we never found suitable housing. So what I would encourage you to do is, if this comes back, if your offer gets countered by this kind of language, this seller accepts this offer subject to seller finding suitable housing, you need to narrow it down. You need to put a specific time and date, and that once the seller reaches an agreement regarding suitable housing, that contingency will be removed forever. That it's not a situation that if their deal falls through, we're back to them finding suitable housing. And the other thing is that the inspection clock, the effective date of the contract, will be when they provide a purchase agreement which says that they've reached an agreement regarding suitable housing. The reason is this: otherwise you're going to have buyers out there who are going to be ordering inspections, paying for appraisals, and starting mortgage processes without knowing whether or not they're ever going to get to a closing.